A little breather as trading got underway in Europe this Thursday. Oil prices fell by around $2 a barrel. A glimmer of hope that OPEC plus producers will get a grip on crude markets. They've surged on Russia's war in Ukraine. Could there be consequences for Moscow?
Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov stressed not only the importance of the oil cartel at Wednesday's meeting with his counterparts from the Gulf region, but also of unity. The principles of cooperation on this basis retain their significance. These statements come amid rumblings in the oil alliance. Under pressure from Western sanctions, Russia's oil production has dropped by 1 million barrels per day. Meanwhile, prices have exploded. In order to limit price shocks, the U.S. is demanding that OPEC increase production volumes. Some member nations are in favor of raising production quotas, but this requires agreement with Russia. After the United States, Russia is the world's second largest oil producer. And through the OPEC Plus membership, Russia is bound to the decisions of the other OPEC countries. Currently, Russia has no interest in increasing production volumes and might not technically be in a position to do so anyway because of the barrage of Western sanctions. A decision is now on the table to exclude Russia from the cartel or not.
Andreas Goltau is director of the Willy Brandt School of Public Policy. Is Russia going to get kicked out of OPEC plus?
Well, I guess that very much depends on the political signal that OPEC wants to send. I mean, there's a couple of countries that have spare capacity still, and that's precisely the ones that are pondering this idea of kicking Russia out. But on the other hand, the question really is, how do you respond to demands from Washington, from Brussels, from the capitals in Europe? And what is the political signal that you want to send? Do you want to align with Russia, or do you actually want to say, look, we as a cartel, we take market management seriously? And that's precisely the question OPEC needs to answer today.
Is there enough spare capacity there to offset the drop in Russian production that we're already seeing?
Well, there is some spare capacity indeed. The Saudis have spare capacity. UAE have spare capacity. There is discussions going on with Venezuela for the sake of the argument on whether some of the sanctions that are still in place could be lifted, possibly increasing supply from that country going forward. So there is spare capacity in the market, but maybe one thing that's important to bear in mind is we're talking about 2.4 million barrels of oil a day that Russia sends to Europe every day. And replacing that might be difficult.
OK, but you say the capacity is there. Is the will there? Because so many of these Middle Eastern nations have very close ties to Russia and rely on Russian wealth.
Well, they, to some extent, can hide behind the Russian actions in Ukraine and that aggressive war, simply because they can blame Russia for higher oil prices and pocket the windfall. And that's precisely what has been happening. But there's another element which is important. And we have seen this in the past already, in the 1970s, for instance, when prices were skyrocketing. At some point, the demand side will respond to the prices and consumption will go down. And that's precisely not what Saudi Arabia wants and other countries that want to stay in the game for some time to come.
To see demand fall, I mean, surely we would have to see some sort of shift to, and a huge shift to renewables, which is already underway, but probably won't come quick enough for the Ukrainians.
Certainly not. And I think it's also important to bear in mind there's some things you can do with renewables when it comes to replacing oil, but there's a lot of things you cannot. Think about the petrochemical industry. You cannot run them on electrons. And that's precisely where the West needs to probably look at demand-side responses. By the way, this is happening already. The global economy isn't in great shape. We will see probably a recession in the Eurozone going forward. The US is not growing as expected, nor is China. So we are seeing some demand-side responses already in the shape of economic contraction, and that will temper demand.
Andreas Goltau, thank you very much for the analysis.
Thanks for having me.